Okay, today's daf, Be'ez Hashem, is daf Masechta Sanhedrin Daf Samach Hey, and we will begin from Samach Beis Amud Beis. Okay, we're beginning from Samach Beis Amud Beis, approximately by the halfway mark of the page. We'll have some catch up here, and then we'll get to today's daf very quickly. So we're discussing and finishing up the idea of Moilech. Moilech was an avodah zarah that had to do with fire. So, and it's not, I wouldn't call it child sacrifice because the kid lived. So, the Gemara is going to describe what is this moilech that if you do this to your child, you get the death penalty. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, "Ein chayev ach yi'averu derech ha'avara." You're not you're not held liable for this moilach until you did it the normal way. In other words, you have to follow directions in order for you to be held liable for this moilach. So the Gemara asks, "Hey Chidami, how was this moilach practice?" It's like I'm trying to say. I sent out a picture. It looked like you burned your own child, but that's not the way the Gemara seems to say. Amar Abaya says, imagine a pathway of stone, right? That's in between two fires, a fire on your right, a fire on your left, and then there's like this stage of stone in the middle. And the father, I guess, had to walk his child across that platform of stone, and it was a rite of passage that maybe to take the fear out of the child or to show that the father is ready to sacrifice his child. That's what Abaya said. Amar Abaya explained. Abaya said that it's shraga delivni b'mitzi. You have a group of stones, a platform of stones in the middle, one stone on top of another, and so that's a walking trail. Nura Mahai Gisa, a fire from one side, a Nura Mahai Gisa, and a fire on the other side. And therefore, you walk your child across that fire towards, I guess, this bull with its outstretched hands, I guess. That was the and was it an avodah zarah or was just a pagan practice? Rava Navam Rava says Kimeshvarta de Puria. He said it's a little different. They would dig like a little pit in the ground, and there was a fire in the pit. And the idea was that you get the child to jump. You jump with the child over the pit to the other side. Again, nobody gets burnt over here, but it's just to do something. Tanya Kavasi, the Rava, the Brisa supports Rava. So the Vira Beregel Potter, the Brisa says that if you do it with your feet, if you walk over it, you're Potter, not like a Baya. It seems to say, like Rava, that you jumped over something, and if you just stepped over it, then you won't be held liable. Now the Brisa continues, it has to be your child. Okay, tzad. B'noy bita, if you walk your son or daughter through the fire, chayev, you're liable. If you walk your father, mother, or brother, or your sister, potter, you're not held liable. It has to be your son, your offspring. Hever atzmai, let's say you brought yourself across the fire, so then potter, you're not held liable. Rabbi Lazar Reb Shimon chayev. Rabbi Lazar Reb Shimon says you're chayev. If you just did it yourself, we're going to see more about that. Hi, Lewis. We're just catching up from Samach Dalet Amud Beis a little bit, then we're going to finish that, and we'll start Samach Hey very shortly. So echad lemoilach ve'echad l'shar avodah zarah. It doesn't matter if you perform this act of walking towards the fire, walking on the fire or jumping over a fire for the moilach, or for other avodah zaras, you're also held liable. So even if at the end of it there was like a different fixture, a different avodah zarah, you're held liable. It had to be specific for that moilach avodah zarah and not for anything else. As we saw in the picture, it looked like a bull with outstretched hands. Amar Ula said, "My time with Rabbi Lazar Shimon. What is the reason, Rabbi Lazar Shimon, that says that if you do it yourself, if instead of bringing your child walk through the fire, you actually walk through the fire, why are you held liable?" Amakra, the pasuk says, "Liyimatzeh b'cha." ba'atzmacha. The Torah says you should not be yourself. Sometimes the Torah word b'cha, it's an extra word that said implies that you yourself shouldn't go to be through the Moilech. Obviously, the pasuk is saying it should not be found a father bringing his children through the Moilech. But since the Torah said the word Becha, it means that not only if the father is bringing the children, but even if the father himself walks through the Moilech, he's liable. Rabbanan, like Darsha Becha, the Rabbanan don't agree with this Becha business. We find in other areas in Komish that the Rabbanim do Darshan Delcha. But Tanya, we learned in a brisa, Avedasoiv, Avedas Aviv. Let's say a guy is walking and he has a choice to retrieve his own lost object and his father's lost object. And if he takes the time to retrieve his own lost object, he won't be able to retrieve his father's lost object. Shaloi kedemis. You have to take care of yourself first, and don't then worry about your father. V'amrina, we say in the Gemara Bab and see my time. What's the reason? V'am Rabbi Yehuda explained. Amakra, the pasuk says, "Efes ki lo yiyah b'cha evyon." You have to make sure that you don't become poor. If you're so busy doing for your father, you're going to become poor. So therefore, if you have a choice, you take care of yourself. Shaloi kedemis l'shel kol adam. You take care of yourself first. So the darshan from the word b'cha. So you see the Rabbanan also like the word b'cha. And says the Gemara, v'hasa me'efes. That's not true. It's not over by Hashavas Aveda, the Chachamim are darshaning that you take precedence because it says the word efes. Efes means do away with poverty in your life. So from that word, they darshan you take yourself first. But the Layam Matzah B'cha, they don't darshan B'cha to teach you that you yourself are not allowed to walk through the Moilech. Amar Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina, Shalosh Krisus B'Avodah Zarah Lama. Why did the Torah write kares when a person does Avodah Zarah? In other words, when there is no witnesses, but you do it on purpose, God 3 times wrote that you're going to get cut off. You're going to die young. Achas l'kedarka, if you serve the idols in the normal fashion. V'achas l'kedarka, even if you serve the idols in the not normal fashion, but you're using, let's say, shechting for the idols or doing incense for the idols, or libations, or bowing to the idol, which we learned that even though it's not the normal way to serve the idol, you're still held liable. And if you do the moilech, you walk through the fire, you get kares too when there is no witnesses. When there is witnesses, then you get skila. If moilech was a form of worship to an avodah zarah, so then that's already included into Ladarka, because that's the normal way to serve the Avodah Zarah of Moilech. It wasn't just a rite of passage or a custom. It was actually serving an idol. So then why did the Torah write 3 times? If you do this Moilech business to another idol, you're chayev. Not only is shechting and bowing to another idol, but if you make a fire and you walk through a fire for the sake of another idol, even if it's not the normal way to serve that idol, you will get kares. The one last thing, the Mandiama Megadef Vajzarihi kares b'Megadef Lamali. Why does the Torah tell you kares if Megadef is an Avodah Zarah? Curse it. According to the opinion that Megadef in the Torah doesn't mean cursing God, it means singing to Avodah Zarah. And if you sing to the Avodah Zarah, so why did the Torah have to write the kares there? If that's the way you serve that idol, so then it's understood that you're going to get kares. So look at the Tanya, the Brisa teaches you, he kares. The Torah tells you you're going to get kares twice. He kares ba'olam hazeh, to kares le'olam haba. That idol worship is worse than any other avera, is that you lose this world, you die young, and if you don't do tshuva, you're not going to get into the next world. Divrei Rabbi Kiva. Amalei Rabbi Shmuel says, like we already have another pasuk by Megadif that says if you're going to get kares. So you have v'nichrasa, he kares, tikares. Are there 3 worlds? Why did the Torah have to write 3 times? Ella, the Rabbi Yishmael in essence agrees with Rabbi Akiva. He just says v'nichrasa is ba'olam hazeh. He kares la'olam haba. But now the Torah wrote tikares. He kares tikares. Right over here, he kares tikares. So sometimes dibra Torah kolashim b'nei adam. Sometimes the Torah repeats itself like a human being. The Torah expresses itself like a human being will express himself, and sometimes you repeat things unnecessarily. Okay, let's go to the new Mishnah. Mishnah is dealing with the occult. Somebody is trying to somebody who's involved with bringing up the dead, like you bring up a ghost. So Baal Oiv is called an Oiv, and he gets skila also. Zeh Pisam, he's a magician. Hamadabe, a sorcerer. Hamadabe Meshachi, he brings up a ghost to his armpit by performing some service, and the ghost comes to his armpit. It's the ghost of a dead person, and that person could talk. So why would a person want to call up a dead person? Because you hire these people because if you're nervous about the future, you call up the dead, and especially if it's somebody that you knew in your lifetime, he's going to tell you the future. So the Torah says that this is usher. If you do it, you get skila. Don't try to figure out the future. Tamim tiyeh em Hashem alakacha. You should accept things the way they are and accept things as they come, and don't try to figure out what's going to happen. And the yadaini, what's a yadaini? Is the same thing as a bal oiv. Exeh hamadaba befiv. That's somebody who speaks with his mouth. In other words, he puts a bone of a certain animal into his mouth, and somehow the ghost will come to his mouth and he will speak to the person who is petitioning a question. So there's the magician that does it, and then there's the petitioner who hired the magician to do it. Hare ela b'skila. So the magician gets skila. V'anishal behem, the one that hired the magician and asks a question from the dead person, b'hazara, he gets a lav, no malchus, because obviously he's not doing an action. He's just asking a question, and so therefore he's just a lav. But to do all this magician work, that required some sort of action. So the Gemara starts off with a question: Ma'ishna hacha diktoni bal oiv yadaini, Ma'ishna gabe krisis diktoni bal oiv v'shari yadaini. The Gemara is asking a question that in Masechta here our Mishnah lists off bal oiv and yadaini, and in Masechta krisis, when the Mishnah lists off all the 37 possible creases, which 36, and if you do all of them, you'll chayev 30 by mistake, then you get 36 karbanos. It only says bal oiv. If by mistake you do oiv, you have to bring a carbon. Why didn't the Mishnah say over there that if you do yadaini, you also have to bring a carbon? So it left out the word yadaini over there. Usually they go together, oiv and yadaini. The Chumash always puts them together. So Rabbi Yochanan answered, Hoil ushneim blab echanemru. That means that in the pasuk, it only in the pasuk it puts it together oiv and yadaini, so that if you would do an oiv and yadaini, if you do the actions of an oiv and yadaini at the same time, not knowing that it's asa, you did it by mistake, you only chayiv one carbon. You only chayiv one carbon because they're both learned out of the same lav. Although if you do an act of on purpose of oiv, you get skila. If you do an act of purpose of yadaini, you get skila. If you do them both by mistake, so you would think you chayiv two carbons. So the Mishnah is telling you that you only chayiv one carbon because it's learned out of one lav, and therefore they're considered grouped under one lav, and therefore the Mishnah could not have said that, because what the Mishnah is talking about, a guy who does all 36, and therefore he'll have to bring 36 karbanos. But if you add in Yudaini, you don't bring 37 karbanos, you'll still only bring 36, so therefore the Mishnah dropped it. Rish Lakish says Yudainu is you don't get a malchus, you don't have to bring a carbon for Yudaini, because you don't even get karis for Yudaini, because of Yishe'ein by Masa, because it has no action. If you think about it, Yudaini was taking a little bone from an animal called a yida bone, and this is a bone from this animal, and you put it into your mouth. That's it. So it didn't have the same kind of body movements that an oiv had, and therefore, if someone performed the Yudaini act, he would get misa, but he won't have to bring a carbon, because if he did it by mistake, because there's no masa, you didn't do an action. In order to bring a carbon, you have to do an avera that has an action, like you cooked on Shabbos by mistake, so you bring a carbon because you did an action. Says the Gemara of Rabbi Yochanan Ma'ashna Bal Oiv Dinoket. Why did if the Masechta Krisis could have said Baal Oiv or Yadaini, why did it choose the word to say the Oiv? And says the Gemara, Mishum the pasuk beikra, because the pasuk always puts oiv first. So the Mishnah only the Mishnah only said the word oiv, not yedayni. Rish Lakish, my time Rabbi Yochanan. Rish Lakish, why doesn't he agree with Rabbi Yochanan? Why does he hold why doesn't he hold that the reason why Yedayni doesn't get Malchus is and bring a separate carbon because it's part of one lav? And says the Gemara, Amar Papa Chalukin Hein B'Misa. Rabbi Papa or Rabbi Shlakish holds that you see that you get the death penalty by doing Yedayni by itself. So therefore, you probably bring a carbon if you did it by mistake. But Rav Shlakish is going to go hold. Rabbi Yochanan is going to hold Chaluka de Lav Shma Chaluka, the Misa Lo Shma Chaluka. Just because it's divided when it comes to the death penalty into two separate categories, doesn't mean that when you do it by mistake, they are two separate categories. Since the Torah, when it warned you, put it into one category, according to Rabbi Yochanan, you would bring one carbon. Rabbi Yochanan, why doesn't Rabbi Yochanan hold like Rish Lakish? At the end of the day, it's not really such an action to do the Yedayni. And that's probably the reason why you don't get bring a carbon. Amalach, Rabbi Yochanan will tell you, Masnis increases Rabbi Kiva, the Amaloi Be'inamasa. The author of that Mishnah increases is Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva holds you don't need an action in order to be chayiv a carbon chatas. So you can't answer that the reason why Yedayni is not bringing a carbon chatas because it doesn't have an action. The author of the Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva, who doesn't require an action for because one of the things that the Mishnah says that if you curse the Eibishter, that's not much of an action. If you do it by mistake, you chayiv a carbon chatas. So we see that the Mishnah goes with the opinion of Rabbi Kiva that you don't need an action. Says the Gemara, Shlokish need Rabbi Kiva Masaraba. Even though Rabbi Kiva doesn't require a huge action, my Suzuta boya, but he still requires you to do something, and so therefore, putting a bone in your mouth is not such a big action. So therefore, you're not chayiv a carbon. Says the Gemara, my megadef, my ma'asika. But what does a guy who's cursing the Eibishter, what kind of action is he doing? And says the Gemara, moving of your lips, that's considered an action. So then the Gemara asks, Bal oiv my ma'asika. If you need an action, then what kind of an action does a Bal oiv do? And says the Gemara, Hakoshev Zroisev Hava Maisa. If he moves around his arms, he's doing something of an action because he's trying to get the dead ghost to come under his armpits. That's an action too. And therefore, again, if you do an oiv, you chayev a carbon chatas. Says the Gemara, Va'afilu Rabbanim, according to Rish Lakish, even according to the Rabbanim, that moving of the arms is considered an action. And it would even the Rabbanan will hold that moving of the arms is not considered an action. For Tanya, we learned in a brisa, Eina chayev ela al davar sheyesh b'maisa. The Rabbanan hold that the brisa says that you only chayev a carbon only if you do an action. Kegoin zibuach v'kita v'nisach v'ishtachava. V'amar Shlakish or Shlakish explained ma tan ishtachava Rabbi Kiva he the Alma. The author of this brisa is Rabbi Kiva, because bowing is not considered a maisa. Rabbi Yochanan Nama, Afila Tamer Rabbanan, the author of that Mishnah brisa could be Rabbanan, because bowing is considered a maisa. But Rabbi Shlakish holds that bowing is not considered an action, and therefore the author of that brisa is Rabbi Akiva. So we see now the Gemara finishes off its question. Hashta l'Reish Lakish kifisus komasai l'Rabbanan lo have a maisa. According to Rish Lakish, bowing of the head, according to Rabbanan, is not considered a maisa. Hakoshes zrois of the bal'oiv have a maisa. Would the waving of the arms, according to the Rabbanan, be a maisa? So, in other words, if Rav Lakish holds that the author of the Mishnah could go even according that the author of the Mishnah is Rabbi Kiva, but the Rabbanan only argue against Rabbi Kiva by Megadev, but by Oiv they agree that it's an action. How could that be? Doing an Oiv action, according to Rish Lakish, is not considered an action according to Rabbi Akiva, according to Rabbanan. Only according to Rabbi Akiva, who would hold that you don't really need an action, it's considered an action. But according to the Rabbanan, that's not considered an action. Answers the Gemara, Ki Kama Rav Lakish, Nami Rabbi Akiva Al Rabbanan. Agreed. According to Rabbanan, you wouldn't be chayiv doing oiv because there is no action. only according to Rabbi Kiva. Says the Gemara, if that was the case, then the Rabbanan should disagree with the Mishnah in two fronts. One, cursing is not an action, and Bal Oiv is not an action. And yet the Rabbanan only argued on the Mishnah, saying that, we agree with everything Rabbi Kiva said in the list in that Mishnah, except Megadev. But how could the Rabbanan agree that Bal Oiv is considered an action? Ella Ama or Ula explained the Mekata L'Shade that what made the Mishnah is discussing the type of oiv that you did was you brought incense to a demon, and therefore that's much more of an action. It's not just moving your arms; you're actually performing some incense. Amalei Rava said Mekata L'Shade Oived Avodah. But if you make incense for the demon, you're serving the demon. Isn't that avodah zarah? And we count avodah zarah in that Mishnah. Ela Amar Rava explained you're not doing a incense to respect the demon. You're doing the incense to charm all the demons to come to you. Amalei Abaya says Hamakata lechaber choy v'chavahu. But if you just charming, because you're getting the demons to come to you, we learned that if you charm animals, let's say all the snakes to come to you, that's only a lav. You don't get misa for that, and you don't have to bring a carbon. So the Gemara says if you charm snakes and scorpions to come around you, then you only get a lav. But if you make such a charm that you're bringing all the demons to come around you, that kind of choiver gets skila, and that's what we're talking about, the oiv in the Mishnah. So in conclusion, the author of that Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva. Both agree, Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish both agree that it's Rabbi Akiva, and they both have a reason why the Mishnah over there did not mention Yadayni as opposed to our Mishnah. Nu Gemara, Tana Rabbanan, Choy v'chomer, if you're a charmer, right? A nacro, I'm not pronouncing nacro, I don't know, something that you know how to charm. Echad chabor gadol, echad chabor katan. If you charm large animals to come around you, or through magic you charm small animals like snakes and scorpions. Even if you do insects, snakes and scorpions. Because why would a person charm snakes and scorpions to come around you? Because you want them to go into the zoo or something like that, so they don't damage people. Amar Abaya said, but since it's a form of magic, you're not allowed to do that. Hilkach, therefore, Haiman Ditzamid Zibura Akabra. If you charm bees and scorpions, Afagav the Mekamav you have intention that you're doing it so that they don't do damage, that they don't sting anybody, also that's still not permitted. Now, so the Gemara says like this, as long as it's not pekuach nefesh, obviously. But if you're doing it just to protect yourself, but you didn't have to do it, then you get a lav for choy v'chover being charming animals. Rabbi Yochanan Maishno the Kvifus Kamasa Rabbana have a Maisa Vakimas Vasav Lai have a Maisa. Why is it, according to Rabbi Yochanan, who held that the Rabbanan could be the author of that brisa, and that brisa that included bowing could go according to Rabbanan, that bowing is considered an action. However, but megadef is not considered an action because all you're doing is moving your lips. What's the difference between bowing your head and moving your lips? Answers the Gemara. Amar Rava said, Shana megadef hoil v'yeshna belev. The most important part of a cursing of the Eibishter has to do with your heart. In other words, you can name anything Yud Kei Vav Kei, your table, and say, I'm cursing the Yud Kei Vav Kei. But that's not God. You called your table Yud Kei Vav Kei, and now you're cursing your table. It really has to do with your heart. Where's your intention to, and who do you intend to curse? And if you intend to curse God, that's the Isser of Megadef. And therefore, Megadef is mostly in the heart, and therefore, it's not considered an action. Now we go to Amid Beis. Masav Rab Zera said, Yatsa Eidim Zoimim She'ein Behem Masa. Eidim Zoimim is an example of a type of Avera which doesn't have a Masa. Now, if you say that moving your lips is considered a Masa, so V'amai, then why is it not considered an action? type of Avera. Holesnai belev, that has nothing to do with your heart. And Eidim Zaimim is like a false witness. And therefore, just saying the testimony and moving your lips should be considered an action. Why did the Brisa over there say that it's not in Makkah say that it's not by increases say that it's not considered a action? Rava said, Shani Edim Zaymimin, Hoyel V'yeshna B'koyel. The main action is with your sound. The sound that you make for Bezdin, that's the main action, and therefore the sound is not a Misa. It's something, it's like audio waves that go into the ear of the Bezdin, and that's not considered an action. It's not a physical thing. Says the Gemara of a Kol Rabbi Yochanan Lav Masi, just making a sound is not considered an action to get an Aveira. For Itma, we learned, Chasama B'koil, if you cause an animal not to eat because you scream at it, or Venhiga B'koil, or you guide, let's say, an ox and a donkey together to pull a load together, and you screamed at them, and they started pulling the load together. Rabbi Yochanan Amachayev, Rish Lakish Amapota. Rabbi Yochanan says Chayev, Akimas Piv Hava Masa. Making noise and moving your lips into making a sound, that is considered an action. Shlokish Ama Akimas Piv Loy Hava Masa. Moving your lips and making a sound is not considered an action. Alama Rava said, so what's Eidim Zoimim not considered an action? And says the Gemara, Shana Eidim Zoimim Hoil V'yesh number that the main avera of Eidim Zaymimin is saying false testimony of what you saw, and seeing is not considered an action. Okay, let's go on to a new sugya, and this is another 3-4 minutes, and then we'll stop. But here we're talking, what is Bal Oiv? I'm explaining it to you. Bal Oiv, Ton Rabbanan, Bal Oiv Zeh HaMedaber Ben HaProkim. You bring up the ghost between your joints. Umebein Atzila Yadav, the joints of your hand. It's maybe the joints of your knee, you can bring it up. And the ghost sits on your knee, or it sits on your fingers. Your elbows. What is Yudaini? Zehamaniach etzem Yudua. These etzem Yudua, this is the name of the animal. It's called a Yudua, and you take the bone of this Yudua animal and you put it in your mouth, and you can see the dead person come to your mouth and start talking. Meisvei, let's ask a question. My love, the mishtoyki orche. The pasuk says in Yeshaya, you're going to be like a ghost that from the ground that has a muffled sound. So we see oiv doesn't bring the ghost to you. Because how would it be a muffled sound? It must be that they go to the gravesite, and from the gravesite the dead person speak, but it doesn't come out of the ground. And says the Gemara, lie, not true. The salik, it does come out of the ground. V'yasa ben aprokim, it speaks in between your joints. Umishtoi, but it speaks in a low voice. It doesn't speak in a loud voice. So when you bring up the dead and you put him on your body, under your armpits or whatever, or your joints, it'll sit there but talk in a soft voice. Tashma, come in here. But Tami Ishel Shaul. Shaul was the one that called up the dead Shmuel in Tanakh, and the woman that brought up the dead Shmuel, she said, "Alakim re'isi oilam min ha'aretz." I see a godly person come out from the ground. My love, the mishtoiki urche. Doesn't she saying that she sees the godly person speaking from the ground, not coming up? And says the Gemara, "Loi, the Yosef ben Aprokim mishtoi." She meant to say that I see him by the joints and he's talking. He actually is in physically moved to me. That's what the woman said to Shaul. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Bal Oiv Echad, Bal Oiv is Echad Hamala B'Zchurayv, Echad Hanishal B'Gagoylus. There are two ways to do Oiv. Sometimes you can bring the ghost and have him sit on your male organ, the Echad Hanishal B'Gagoylus, or if you go to the skeleton of the dead, and it's lying there on the ground, you could ask the skeleton, the head skull, to tell you something. Ma ben zelazeh, what's the difference? When you bring the dead up onto your male organ, it appears upside down, the feet on top and the head on the bottom. And you can't do this work on Shabbos. Nishal begagoylus, but if you're asking a skull that's on the floor, Oila kedake, it stands up in the normal way. V'oila b'Shabbos, and you can do this act on Shabbos. Says the Gemara, oila, when you're asking a skull and a body, a skeleton on the ground, lehechen solak, where should it get up? Hakame menach, it's laying there in front of you. It's not going to get up. When you're asking the skeleton, it answers in the normal way. It doesn't answer like in riddles, and you can do this on Shabbos. Va'af sheilazu shal tunapusis Rabbi Akiva. Another 2 minutes, and we'll stop. Rabbi Turnafinis asked Rabbi Akiva. Amallah, he asked him, Ma yomi yamayim, what makes Shabbos so special? Amalei, so Rabbi Akiva answered Turnarufis, which was a Roman officer, Ma gvar meguvern, what makes you more special than any other Roman? Amalei, so he said, the Maritzave, my boss hired me for this top job. So Rabbi Akiva answered him, Shabbos Nami de Maritzave. Shabbos Nami was also, the boss made it a special day. Amalei, so Turnafusis asked Rabbi Akiva, Hachi kaminalach, but this is what I meant to ask you. Mi yema di dana shabta. Can you prove to me that today is Shabbos? Maybe Monday was the special day of God. How do you know physically in the physical world that today is Shabbos? Amalei, so Rabbi Akiva said, Nahar Sabatya Nechiach. If you look at this now, the Sambatyan River, which throws stones through the water all week long, and then on Shabbos, it just stops for some unexplained reason. Bal oiv yechiach, or you try to do the action of oiv on Shabbos, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work. So you kivrei shel aviv yechiach, or the burial where you buried your father. You turn it for Sarasha. Go there on Shabbos. She'ein mal oshim b'Shabbos. Smoke does not come out of where they buried your father on Shabbos, because all week he's sitting in Gehenim, so smoke is coming out of his grave. And on Shabbos, there is no smoke coming out of his grave, so it must be that in the physical world you can feel Shabbos. Amalai, so Tunufusis Harasha answered, Rabbi Akiva, Bizuse beishtutu v'kilalte. You embarrassed me, you insulted me, humiliated me, and you cursed me because you said my father is in Gehenna. Anyway, the Gemara just says, Shoel Oiv, when you call up the dead, the Oiv, Hainu v'doyer shalamesim. But there's another pasuk that says, don't ask anything from the dead people. So what's the difference between an oiv and a doyer shalamesim? And says the Gemara, doyer shalamesim is kedatanya. The doyer shalamesim doesn't mean you're calling up the dead ghost to sit on your lap, or you're speaking to a skull. But doyer shalamesim is another way to talk to the dead, to communicate with the dead. Zeh hamar v'atzma, you fast. And you sleep in a cemetery, so that this tumah spirit should come upon you. Would cry. If you starve yourself and you sleep in a cemetery, a ruach tuma will come upon you. So therefore, hamar of atzma, someone who starves himself, kadesha tishra olav ruach tahara, alachas kama bakama. If you want, if you starve yourself, so a pure spirit should come upon you. Certainly, it will come upon you. But avoma esa av shavnesenu garmalano. But we as much as we try to bring the Shechina upon us, we can't, because we still have averos that block. No matter how much we starve ourselves and do some purifications, it doesn't work. Your sins divide you between you and God. So Amarava, we'll finish off over here. Tzadikim have the power to create a world. Rabba, the Gemara says, Rabba, bara gava. He created like a goylem, a human being. Obviously, Shadra the Kamid Rabbi Zera. So he sent this human being to Rabbi Zera. This goylem have a kamashtoi bade. So Rabbi Zera tried to have a conversation with it. V'loy have a kamahadale, and the goylem could not answer, because Rabba could create a physical human being, a Superman, but he can't create the power of speech. Amalei. So when Rabbi Zera realized that this was a goylem, min chavraya at, you were created by my friend. Hadala forech, go to your back to the ground, get buried again. And says the Gemara concludes, Rav Chanina, Rav Oishia, have a yasri kol mali shafti. They would sit every erev Shabbos, va'asik b'sefer Yetzira, and learn this Kabbalah book called Sefer Yetzira. umivrele igla tilsa, and they would create this delicious calf, a 3-year-old calf, which has a delicious meat, probably, and they would shecht it probably, and probably eat it on Shabbos. So that's how they had food on Shabbos. They created their own, they made creations. Okay, a lot in this stuff. Okay, Shabbos.
Phew, that was a lot.